awesome to be here. Thanks so much for having us. Amazing place.
Thank you so much. Thanks for coming.
So I read in a Pepperdine article about your transition that you feel sometimes friends don't ask you often enough, how are you doing? So I want to start with that question.
How am I doing? I'm doing amazing. You know, at the time that I did that interview, I was class president at Pepperdine for 3 years at that point. And I felt I really owed my class and my peers an explanation as to why I would be taking a semester off and leaving my post as president, because I was, you know, that was the best part of my college experience, was being in student government. And, you know, when I wrote that article, I kind of felt like everyone was really wondering what's going on in your life. You know, I noticed these physical changes. I noticed you've kind of drawn back socially.
This is all pre-transition, right?
This is during my transition, but I was not full-time as Sophia at that point. So, you know, I was going through this transition, and people would notice gradual changes from hormones, minor procedures, hair removal, that kind of thing. And, you know, people would automatically have these questions like, what's going on? You know, your nose looks a little different, or, you know, your hair's getting a little longer, and it wasn't really focused on how are you doing. So I thought that was kind of a nice way to end that article. Don't focus on the physical stuff. The physical changes are obvious. Worry about how the person is doing in general when people are going through changes in their lives. And that's kind of, you know, why I wanted to end that article on that note.
Mm-hmm. So, but I really mean it. How, you know, how are you doing? You know, really, genuinely, honestly,
Yeah.
how are you feeling now? It's been a whirlwind year or two.
Yeah. Well, I started transitioning when I was 18 years old, right when I got to college. And you know, I think the most awkward, uncomfortable time for me was that in-between time when I was transitioning and not really telling everyone about it, telling anyone about it. And once I finally got through and, you know, became Sophia to the world, I've been so happy. Since then, I've graduated college. I have had amazing professional opportunities, being the executive director of the Caitlyn Jenner Foundation and being Caitlyn's business manager. And personally, you know, I'm just so much more open with my family, my friends. I feel I can have more genuine connections. And then physically, after going through the necessary medical treatment to deal with dysphoria, I feel liberated beyond belief. So for me, I just feel like I'm thriving.
So no regrets so far?
No regrets whatsoever. You know, there are things that I do look back on and think, should I have done this a little bit differently? Probably. But those are so minor in the big scheme of things. In the big picture, I'm so happy with where I am and what the opportunities that have been given to me and that I've worked for. And overall, no regrets.
So prior to this announcement that you did at Pepperdine in, I believe it was November of 16,
yes,
you were known as a gay man?
I never identified myself publicly as gay, not because I did not feel that I was attracted to men, but I didn't feel that gay represented me. I had so many gay friends. You know, I lived in Beverly Hills at the time. I was around the West Hollywood crowd, and I just never felt like I fit in with the gay world. I felt there's something further along here than just being gay. So for me, it was more about my identity as a female, which I was able to, you know, explore through a lot of conversations with therapists and undergoing the appropriate medical treatment for myself. So I wouldn't say I ever identified as a gay male, though I had always been with really strong men.
Pepperdine is a Christian university.
Yes.
So being gay or being trans at Pepperdine, how was that received there?
Well, at first, when I was there, you know, the world saw me, or the school saw me as gay. Like I said, I didn't see that inside. But they saw me as gay because I would be, you know, I was dating a guy. I had a long-term relationship. And that was received okay. But then when I came out as trans, so publicly at the school, you know, people were never mean to my face, never rude to me on a personal level. But behind the scenes, I think it was weird because I was the first transgender person to ever graduate from Pepperdine. I was the first transgender person to ever be in student government as president at Pepperdine. And I was also in the economics and finance program, which was totally male dominated. And for me, that was actually really an empowering moment to see, you can go through this, be a beautiful woman, and keep up with the boys. And that was a huge learning experience for me, and it made me feel really confident in my womanhood. So I really liked that a lot. In fact, when I went back to school after I fully medically transitioned, I took the semester off to do that. My first day, I remember a couple of guys in like the upper division econ classes that I had been in classes with for 4 years said, "Who are you? I haven't seen you in the econ department before." And I said, Sophia Hutchins, you know?
Well, that's as good time as any to break out this picture, which is, all over there. But we catch that on camera. But you could see why maybe they didn't recognize you.
Well, that picture, the tabloids love sensationalizing the before and after. First of all, that picture was when I was 13 years old.
Really? That young there?
I was 13 years old, and it was a debate team photo. And they love sensationalizing this before you're like this dorky looking 13-year-old boy. And then after you're this, people call me a model, this beautiful woman. And, for me, that's a little sensationalized before and after, but that's definitely not representative.
Yeah, I mean, it really does, and like you said, they're probably sensationalized because it really does look like, such two different people.
Yeah.
I was going Richie Cunningham, if you ever saw Happy Days here, and then I'm going Ivanka Trump here,
thank you.
which I think is a nice compliment, right?
I agree. I get Ivanka a lot.
Yeah.
We do a lot of political work, political lobbying, and I remember one night I was seated with the Secretary of the Treasury, Stephen Mnuchin, whose wife also went to Pepperdine and looks a lot like me. And, there's press all over this event. And one member of the press asked, "Oh my God, are you Ivanka Trump? Can I get a picture?" And I said, "No, I'm not. I'm Sophia Hutchins." And then because I'm sitting next to the Secretary of the Treasury, Mr. Mnuchin, they say, "Oh my God, are you Isabel Mnuchin?" And I said, "No, I'm Sophia Hutchins." So not all of us blonde girls are the same, but yeah, no, I get that a lot. And I take it totally as a compliment.
Yeah. So I mean,
they could say worse things.
Exactly. So staying on the physical, I imagine that you're probably quite pleased with how the physical has turned out, being as beautiful as you are.
Thank you so much. I am very pleased. But there is a dark side to being a pretty woman, and being on the other side. Although I transitioned at a young age, I felt like my transition wasn't that big of a change for me. I always felt like I was a more effeminate boy when I was a boy, and never like a macho, masculine guy. But after I transitioned, I realized, oh my goodness, when you are a beautiful woman in the position that I'm in business, negotiating with usually a lot of older white men on business deals or raising money, you are viewed very differently, and you deal with sexism in the workplace, especially in Hollywood, because you're kind of just seen as a pretty face. And I've made it my mission and my passion to fight for women, trans and cis, that you can be beautiful as can be, and a badass bitch in the negotiating room. And I love that. And I think for me to try to prove that, regardless, putting the trans thing aside, just women have so much power, and use that feminine power that you have. That's what I try to do with that beauty.
We've talked about Sabrina Richmond, my fraternity brother, who
Yes.
became my sister, and she was my first interview for my transgender movement, and you may end up being the bookend to that. But one of the things that I learned from her that's interesting that a lot of people don't realize is that as a trans person, you truly know both sides of the equation. You've lived as a male, and you can see things from a male perspective, And now, as a female, you can see things from a female perspective, and she almost felt like she's a super person to have this knowledge of both sides. It gives you an edge.
You know, that is a really interesting point, and I hear that a lot. For me, I transitioned at such a young age. I didn't really have that male privilege. A lot of people did. When they transitioned at a much older age, like someone like Sabrina. And not to discredit at all what Sabrina's saying, she's absolutely correct. She gets to see both sides. And a couple of months ago, I was at Facebook doing some work with, I book all of Caitlyn's speeches and corporate appearances. And one of them was at Facebook with all the LGBT employees. And we met with Sheryl Sandberg. And she said, the best data on sexism comes from trans women that transition later in life. And one of my good friends, who's now on the board of our foundation, the Caitlyn Jenner Foundation, is a woman named Debbie Ferguson. Debbie transitioned about 3 years ago and had worked extremely successfully in Silicon Valley. She created software, sold it to Google, and then worked at Facebook for 15 years. And now she's back at Google. And she's a trans woman, and she transitioned later in life. And she's case in point. She said, I'll be in board meetings now. Beautiful woman, transitioned very well, completely physically changed her appearance. And she gets asked in meetings with executives from other companies, so whose secretary are you, or whose assistant are you? And she says, well, actually, I'm a managing director at Facebook. I run our engineering program. And I see that in my life all the time. You know, you can look at how the media depicts me. They depict me as a 21-year-old, which I'm not even 21, 22-year-old model. I've never modeled a day in my life. Thank you. I'm pretty, but so much more than just the looks. And you really see that Sheryl Sandberg's point of that's the best data point for gathering sexism when people transition later in life, and how they're treated after the transition versus before is so fascinating to me.
So we talked about the foundation and your role there. Let's talk about your relationship with Caitlyn. How did you guys first meet?
Caitlyn and I met through, we met about 3 years ago, through our makeup artist and our hairstylist.
So this is pre-announcement at Pepperdine?
This was pre-announcement at Pepperdine, yes. But at that point, I had told family, close friends.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And
had been transitioning at that point for a few years.
So coincidentally, you were sharing the same hairdresser?
Yes.
Okay, and
Yes.
then the hairdresser introduced you?
Yep.
And did you talk about transition at that time with Caitlyn?
The hairdresser I went to, I told her what was going on. I said, I'm trying to grow my hair out. And she's like, why are you trying to grow your hair out? And I explained to her, I'm transitioning and would like to keep it going a little longer. And she said, oh my God, you won't believe who is another client. And I said, who? She said, Caitlyn Jenner. And, at the time I went to Pepperdine, but I lived in Beverly Hills at that time. And she introduced us, and we kicked it off and developed a great relationship.
So was she really instrumental in assisting you through the process?
No. In some ways. I've read reports that Caitlyn paid for my sexual reassignment surgery or paid for gender-affirming surgeries. Not true at all. She was there for me emotionally, for sure. She would call and check up on me, but we weren't, in a relationship or really close as we were after I completed my transition.
Mm-hmm. So, and when did it become a romantic relationship?
I wouldn't describe it as a romantic relationship. I would describe our relationship as we're partners. We're business partners. I'm the executive director of her foundation. We have so much in common. We see the world so similarly, and we both are such a good match for each other because we challenge each other. She challenges me in so many ways, has allowed me to grow in so many ways, and I hope I challenge her to grow. And I think because we share so many of the same passions and views, it's just a great match, a great partnership.
Mm-hmm. But you are living together.
We do live together, yes.
Okay. So I mean, just to kind of, it's the elephant in the room. A lot of people are wondering, is this romantic or is it not? I think it's kind of important just to kind of put that issue to bed rather than kind
I don't think it's that important.
No?
No, I think it's unfortunate that the media has fixated onto, is it romantic or is it not? I don't think we need to talk about is it romantic or not. We're partners in everything we do. We're inseparable. We're business partners. We live together. We share a dog. We share family. We share a life together. But as far as caving into the media and having one of us label it as something, we're not going to do that.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that perhaps are distracting from the trans issues that you guys want to advocate for is this, what do they call it, November, December, what do they call it when the relationship is, anyway, the age difference, 68 and 22. How do you feel about, there's a lot of focus on that. How do you explain how a 68-year-old and a 22-year-old could have such an intimate relationship as you guys have?
Well, it's unfortunate, again, that the media is so fixated on these sensationalized stories. Everything has to be a big sensation. And, I don't see age as a factor in our relationship. I see we are two souls that are a fantastic match for one another. And I feel that we're so blessed to have found each other and to be so supportive of one another in everything that we do. And, I feel beyond blessed that, we've been able to keep it going for the time we've been able to keep it going. I don't think of the age difference as anything. Caitlyn has more energy than me most days. Caitlyn's out playing 18 holes of golf and I'm like, oh my God, I'm exhausted. I just want to go chill,
Yeah. Well, I'm 19 years older than my fiance, and I get the same thing. I tend to have more energy than her, but not quite the difference of you guys. I did try to do some research, and I found Hugh Hefner was the only one I could identify with a bigger age gap than you two. So
the age gap is there, but we don't feel that it's there. I think the media feels that it's there because it is sensationalized. It sells papers, it sells articles, it sells clicks, but for us, it's not even a factor.
And what, we talk about sexual orientation. So if you're a trans woman with a trans woman, does that mean trans lesbian? Is that the right terminology for it? Or?
I wouldn't even go down that road. I think that my sexual orientation is not something that I need to discuss. I think, I choose to be with someone based on the person, and the person happens to be a trans woman, and I think that's great.
Had you ever dated a transgender person before?
I would not say we're dating. First of all, I would back up. I would say we are partners. I would not use the word girlfriend. I would not use the word dating. We're partners. And no, I had never been with anyone that was not a male.
So there's haters out there on the internet.
Yes.
Let's go through just a couple of them just to help you set the record straight. I mean, the obvious one is this is all for publicity. This relationship isn't real.
Not going to respond.
This was one that I found, hopefully you'll get a chuckle out of this one, but they say that, yes, Sophia transitioned. She transitioned to being a Kardashian.
A Kardashian? My goodness.
Well, I think they mean that in the sense that, now you are on Instagram and you are beautiful and out there, and I know they're saying you're model, perhaps you're not modeling, but there appear to be modeling pictures and so on, and suddenly you're in that type of world. Do you feel like you're in that type of world now?
No, I'm a businesswoman. Because I am pretty and I post a pretty picture on Instagram, suddenly I'm a model. And, hats off to the Kardashians and Jenners. They have channeled the ultimate power a woman could channel. They are all smart businesswomen. They are all extremely hard workers, and I look up to all of them. And I think, being raised by Bruce and being raised by Chris really influenced them, and I couldn't be more proud of all of them.
And do you have a relationship with his children and grandchildren? Her, sorry?
Yes. The family is all extremely nice to me, extremely welcoming. We just had lunch with Kylie and little Stormy yesterday. And, I feel very welcome.
That you connected with Caitlyn because you couldn't find a job.
Couldn't find a job. Okay. Well, I was the president of my class for 3 years. I interviewed at every bank on Wall Street, Goldman Sachs, Merrill Lynch, Credit Suisse, the list, JP Morgan Chase, the list goes on. I could have found a job. My job now is so much more fun, and I love that I'm at the intersection of entertainment, business, and philanthropy.
Yeah, let's talk about what you're doing as her manager.
Yeah.
What are you hoping to achieve by being her manager?
I've achieved a lot for her. Basically, our business is broken down in a few different segments. We have public speaking, we have media appearances, and then we have endorsement deals. And between me, our legal team, and our public relations team, we're able to get deals done really nicely between that team and myself managing our team. And, I think it's been fabulous.
So there's the business side of managing her, and then there's the advocacy side of
Yes.
manager, right? So on the
Yes.
advocacy side, address that.
As her manager, I like to merge the two. I think everything Caitlyn does has to have a philanthropic twist. That means, for instance, the MAC deal that she did with MAC Cosmetics, Estee Lauder. There was the business side, and you're getting paid to license your name. But there is the philanthropic side where a percentage of all sales goes to the transgender, MAC's transgender initiative in the AIDS Fund. So things like that, when you get an endorsement deal, a percentage of proceeds or a percentage of profits or an annual guarantee of some kind goes to charity. I love blending those two things together. And I think because we are in the privileged position of the trans community, that's our obligation. That's my obligation as her business manager. That's her obligation, or it's not her obligation to do any philanthropy, but we're blessed to be in positions that we're in where we can do that.
Yeah, I mean, she is arguably the most famous transgender person in the world.
Definitely.
And with that comes obligations, I would imagine she feels and you feel.
She definitely feels a tremendous sense of obligation to helping the trans community because, as you know, the community is so marginalized. As the executive director of the foundation, where I spend most of my time is raising money. But on the flip side of that, what do we do when we have, a ton of money raised? We have to give it away. And I get to vet organizations to give it away too. And in the process of vetting those organizations, I'm looking over financial statements, I'm looking over 990s, you look over all these forms and balance sheets and income statements. And when you're looking through what these extremely marginalized organizations are running their operations on, and they're making such a difference in doing so, you really realize, wow, we have a tremendous responsibility to not only identify these organizations, but help them. Most trans organizations that we end up supporting have operating budgets under $10,000 a year. So, our donations are often the largest donations that they've ever received because they are the forgotten of the LGBT.
So it must be frustrating for you, though, to have the media so focused on the nature of the relationship between you two, and it's pushing aside the other things you guys want to.
It is. That is a frustration to me. But I do realize, like we said earlier, the media loves a sensationalized story. They love, the new Kardashian wannabe. Come on. No way.
What about they say engagements? No engagement.
If I was engaged, I would announce that I was engaged. If Caitlyn, and I were to be engaged, we would announce that. We're not ashamed of our relationship at all. But we do like to have some privacy. And that's something, that we would decide when the time was right to announce.
So we've talked about what you're trying to achieve for Caitlyn. What about for yourself? You're now in this position of notoriety and being able to assist Caitlyn what she's doing. What do you hope to achieve for yourself ultimately?
Well, I think in what we are doing, I'm achieving a lot for myself. I don't know a lot of 22-year-olds that have done, million-dollar endorsement deals. Do you? I don't know a lot of 22-year-olds that have found investors for companies and that have ultimately started companies. So I feel, I'm just adding a lot of experiences that are invaluable. But with those experiences, also being in the public eye kind of takes a toll on you if you let it. And I've learned, as we've been together, how to handle that in healthier ways. And, let haters hate. You're not going to change the haters' minds. And you just keep doing what you know is right. In the end, you'll prevail.
So do you have a vision for yourself career-wise down the road? For instance, I've read, at one point you wanted to be a corporate finance lawyer. Another thing indicated that you might be interested in politics down the road. What do you envision for yourself down the road?
Politics, no. When I was younger, I did think a lot about politics. And when I say younger, I mean high school days. In high school, I was the state debate champion for 2 years in a row. I was nationally ranked for 3 years in a row. My high school experience was very different than most people's high school experience. I was on the road every weekend, literally every weekend, to the East Coast at a debate tournament and did extraordinarily well in debate. So I kind of thought, maybe I want to go down the law school political road. And then I got to college and I said, wait, I love business. I want to go on Wall Street. And then I met Caitlyn and I realized I can do business, do big deals, be a part of big projects. And then also in the entertainment world, I love it. I see my future as a businesswoman, as a philanthropist, as someone that gets shit done.
So let's talk about your transition. It
Okay.
seems, as you said, you were an overachiever in high school.
Oh, thank you.
Things seem to be going extremely well for you, and you're going to Pepperdine and Malibu.
Thank you.
It seems to be somewhat incongruous with other trans stories where they're really struggling. So
Yeah.
why? It didn't seem like you were struggling. Were you struggling?
I had, I think, the easiest transition anyone could possibly have. I grew up with my grandparents, and my grandparents were entirely supportive of my transition. I was in a really good high school, a really elite college prep school in Seattle.
Catholic school.
Catholic school, which was a phenomenal experience because of debate. And then I got into a pretty decent college. I got into Emory University, University of Virginia, and Pepperdine. And I ultimately went with Pepperdine because they gave me the best deal. I'm a businesswoman, you have to remember. So they gave me the biggest scholarship.
That was grades-based?
Merit-based.
Merit-based. Were you into athletics at all in high school?
Never. No. Actually, living with the greatest athlete in the world has turned me more into an athlete, and now I'm like a golf fanatic. But that's beside the point. I would say that I always wanted a lot. My grandparents raised me to chase my dreams. My grandparents chased their dreams. My grandfather grew up in a town of 30 people in rural Vermont, and no one ever left that town. You either went into the military or you went to work at a granite quarry. My grandfather went to college in Iowa and married my grandmother. They lived 2 doors down from each other in this small town and moved to New York and then eventually moved to Seattle, worked at Boeing for 25 years, then became an independent contractor for the DOV designing rockets. He was a rocket scientist. And he was my number one inspiration and someone that I still look up to this day of how I want to live my life and model my life after. So for me, being raised by such a supportive family, being in a college where I know, if I worked my butt off, I could get a job afterwards. And then, going through a transition where I was able to get the medically necessary treatment for me. I'm just so privileged and so blessed to be in that position.
So why is it that you were raised by your grandparents?
I grew up with my grandparents primarily because my parents had divorced at a really young age. And I was in a school district. So they didn't have a lot of money when they divorced. My mom, I lived with a single mom. And they didn't have a lot of money at the time, so they couldn't send me to a good school, and I needed to be in a good school because I was just, not being challenged at all. So I moved in with my grandparents because they had the means to send me to a really good school.
And how is your relationship now with your parents? Do you still maintain a relationship with them?
I'm not super close with my parents. I never really have been. I'm closer with my mom than I am with my dad. And we have a great relationship. We talk every day. Caitlyn calls her mom in the morning. I call my mom in the morning, and then I call my grandmother right after that. And it's really nice.
And but essentially, when you were a child, you were living with your grandparents, and that's in Washington?
Yes, in Seattle.
Okay. And where was mom and dad? Were they at least in the same
Yeah,
city?
they were in the same area, just about 45 minutes out of Seattle.
So we talked about you have an easy transition. We know that suicidal thoughts common in the trans community.
Yeah.
Is that something that was ever part of your experience?
I never had the inclination. I never had the thought. I could see why people would, because I am very familiar with the struggles of the community through my work at the foundation in vetting out various organizations. And, the suicide rate is 10 times higher than the general public. The general public has a 4.7% suicide rate. The trans community has a 40% suicide rate. And, I was just so lucky that I was in a supportive family, and I felt that when I got through this transition, I was going to make it onto the other side and be just fine.
So when did you start first feeling like perhaps I'm in the wrong body?
Oh, 4 or 5 years old. I remember telling my parents.
Grandparents or parents? Sorry.
Parents, because my parents divorced at 5 when I was 5 years old. So it was while they were still raising me when I was really young. I remember telling them, I said, something about, I don't know why I have a penis. And they said, oh, okay, well, that's interesting, and kind of swept it under the rug. That was my first memory of ever bringing up gender dysphoria to them. And for me, that was the kind of the first time I ever publicly expressed that. And then in high school, I was in a long-term relationship with a guy who was a few years older than me, not 45 years older than me like Caitlyn, but a few years older than me. And I remember telling him, I said, I need to do something because this isn't right. I just feel really dysphoric in this body. And I felt like my soul, my personality is exactly the same as it was then, but my body just reflects how I feel on the inside.
So Sabrina, to refer to her again, referred to it as having a female spirit. How would you describe what gender dysphoria and ultimately transgenderism was to you?
Yeah, I think it's so different for everyone. For me, I truly feel my spirit, my soul, my mind is exactly the same. I am just so much more comfortable physically. Before I transitioned, I felt like, yeah, I'm definitely just a girl, but I'm in the wrong body. And I felt trapped in that body. And I needed to have the hormones to change the body, for me, the surgeries to change the body. And I emphasize for me because I realize not everyone needs that to feel like a woman. But for me, that's what I wanted to do. And that's what made me ultimately so at peace. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Well, a bit. I mean, it raises the ultimate question, what is this?
What is transgender to
Yeah.
me? Transgender to me is, someone that was born either male or female sex and wants to change their, the way the world perceives their sex.
And do you ponder what the causes of it is?
No, I think I truly was made this way.
So yeah, and that's what I meant by spirit. That Sabrina basically feels like she was born with a female spirit. That's how she defines it.
Yeah,
would you define it
I
similarly?
think that's a great definition. Born with female spirit. Born, society really defines male and female. Society defines masculine and feminine. And by society's definition, I always felt feminine. I always felt female. physically, I was not female at birth because the doctor said, oh, it's a boy, he's got a penis. And that's kind of an unfortunate way to define sex or gender. I think it's so much more complex than that because of the influence society has on defining masculine and feminine, male, female, sex, and gender.
So spirit, that's a bit of a metaphysical explanation for
Yes.
it. What about more of a scientific explanation for
Yeah.
it? Do you have a scientific explanation for it, or do you look for that?
I'm not qualified to answer that. I am not well versed in research on if there, on what, if there is a common theme of chemical reactions in the brain that transgender people experience or transsexual people experience more than cisgender people. I don't know.
So something we've been covering a lot in the show is children with gender dysphoria, and what should parents do? A lot of parents out there are faced with the 4 or 5-year-old that says, why do I have a penis?
Yes.
So having been that 4 or 5-year-old, how do you feel your parents handled it, and what is your advice to parents when the child comes to you with that?
My parents did not handle it well, but I don't blame them. I think if, your little boy in your head said that he didn't feel like a boy, it would be a little nerve-wracking for a parent to hear that. They see you as their son, their baby boy. And so I don't blame my parents at all. However, I think we're in a country, in a society in the United States that is very Judeo-Christian. And as a result of being that Judeo-Christian country, I don't think there is a lot of openness in discussions on sexuality or gender. We do a lot of work internationally, and most recently I was in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam. And Amsterdam is a very open, much more secular society than we are. And as a result of that, those conversations are much more open, much more well received by parents and more expected than they are here in the United States. And if a child, were to present that idea to a parent in Amsterdam or in the Netherlands, for instance, the parents are going to seek treatment because it's more open, it's out in the open, the dialogue is there, it's okay. I think our society is behind that curve. And it's unfortunate, but I think we'll get there.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm hoping to do, is open up that dialogue, because there's extremists on both sides.
Yes.
And you've got the extremists, maybe it's the religious right, what have you, that wants to keep it down and in the closet.
Yeah.
My concern, though, also is the extremists on the other side that basically, it seems to me they want to remove all stigma associated with transgenderism. I 100% support that. But in order to remove it, they want to say that, well, if the 5-year-old comes to you and says that I feel like a girl, what you need to do is immediately embrace that, let him wear a dress, let him change his name. That's the best thing to do. And that's what I would say extremists on the LGBT side seem to be telling parents to do. Do you think that that's the right approach for parents, is to immediately help this 5-year-old who says, I don't know why I have a penis, to start transitioning essentially?
I think that's a point where you start exploring how serious this sensation is in their head. As a parent, if I were the parent and my daughter said, why do I have a vagina? I think I should have a penis at a young age. I would probably seek out medical attention to try to diagnose that mentally. And I think letting your child explore dress up or explore makeup or explore how they see themselves is really important. I think self-expression needs to have an extremely high value placed on it by parents, but don't take it too far. Just because your son is playing with Barbies, or your son is interested in wearing your eyeshadow, or your daughter is interested in playing on the football team, does not mean that they are gender dysphoric. I think a lot of diagnosis needs to go into that, and a lot of time needs to be spent by parents and physicians and those well-versed in the community. A lot of time needs to be spent making sure that's the right decision for them. Never jump to any conclusions, because let me tell you, I have straight guy friends that played with Barbies as kids or played dress up as kids. And It's not that simple. And I think the extremists to that end that say, oh my God, my son's playing with Barbies, wearing makeup, wants to wear a dress, and needs to start transitioning could be detrimental to his mental health and physical health.
And, people with gender dysphoria, we have interviewed a number of them for the show. I mean, this is not a fun thing to deal with, right? You had a relatively smooth transition, you said, but still, this is a challenge for people to deal with.
It is a big challenge. Not only do you have financial barriers, you have to go through, a lot of people choose to go through extensive medical procedures that are not easy to go through. You have the societal rejection of trans people. A trans woman of color is murdered every 2 weeks in the United States of America. In the UK, there's a 50% attempted suicide rate of trans youth between the ages of 15 and 25. These are serious decisions that people have to make that have serious consequences, often, unfortunately, death, whether it be through murder or suicide. And it's not easy to go through these things. And, like I said, I am not the rule by any stretch. I am by far the exception. Thank God I'm the exception, because I can use my privilege, and Caitlyn feels exactly the same way, use our privilege to help people that are representative of the community.
So I think this is a good time to get into religion and politics. They say you're not supposed to discuss religion and politics, but we know each other well enough now. Let's get into some religion and politics. You were in a Catholic high school.
Yes.
You go to a Christian university. Mm-hmm. So tell me about your personal religious views. Do you believe in God?
I think I'm still figuring that out. I grew up Catholic. I have tremendous respect for people's religious beliefs, no matter what they are. At the end of the day, I think there is one higher power, whatever it is, and all of these man-made religions, have caused a lot of turmoil, not just in my community, but across history, obviously. So I don't subscribe to one religion or one faith, but what I do see is my Christian brothers and sisters, my Muslim brothers and sisters, my Jewish brothers and sisters, all at the end of the day are praying to the same higher power. There's one power that created you, me, you, whether you're Christian, Hindu, Muslim, Buddhist, Jewish, etc. So that's where I'm at. I don't believe any faith has all of the answers. I don't subscribe to any faith specifically. And I take a very agnostic approach.
So most of these faiths,
yes,
basically God created you
yes.
as a man. That you're destroying or changing God's creation. What's your response to that?
My response to that is God created me, okay? At the time of my birth, I had a penis. And as a result of having a penis, society and medicine has defined that if you have a penis, you're a boy, you're a male. I don't subscribe to that belief. I believe you can be born with a penis and be a woman, a girl, a female.
And what about your university? Does Pepperdine University take a position on that?
Oh boy, do they. Pepperdine University is Church of Christ school. And while I was president my junior year, I believe, we created our first, which I was instrumental in doing, we created our first ever LGBTQ club on campus.
It was permitted.
It was permitted. We fought like hell to get it permitted. Pepperdine University has been around for 65, 70 years. And for the past 5, 6, 7 years, there have been proposal after proposal of getting an LGBT club approved by ultimately the Board of Regents, which the Board of Regents is the board of directors for Seaver College. And they have to approve of controversial clubs. And LGBT was a controversial club. So, that was a big fight and a big challenge, but ultimately we prevailed. The school said that we could not promote gay marriage, but we could promote living as a LGBT person. And we could not advocate for gay marriage because the Church of Christ doesn't subscribe to gay marriage. I don't know what the Church of Christ's position is on a transgender person, but, you know, I didn't really care.
So let's keep ticking through some of these hot button
Absolutely.
issues. Are you a woman or are you a trans woman?
I'm a woman. Yep.
And explain that.
I have a vagina. I've gone through sexual reassignment surgery. All of my documents say female. I, for all intents and purposes, will be socialized entirely externally as female, minus my first 18 years prior to transitioning. So in my head, I am a woman.
Now, you said that you have a vagina as a result of reassignment
Sexual
surgery.
reassignment. That was the more crude way of saying I went through sexual reassignment surgery, yes.
So what about someone who hasn't been through the full surgery? Could that person be also a woman as opposed to a trans woman?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So how would you define, at what point do you stop becoming male and become female?
I think you get to define who you are, and I wouldn't jump to say that, I wouldn't jump to define anyone's identity for them. I would say I am a woman. I identify as a woman. My experience, certainly the society perceives me as a trans woman, and that doesn't offend me, but I perceive myself as a woman.
Yeah, that was something that Sabrina touched on. In her view, she'll always be a trans woman, but that's just a different way of looking at it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and but it does ultimately touch on politics and policies and so on. So, for instance, like trans athletes, that's a big controversial thing right now in high school. So, if a boy transitions to a girl, boy transitions to a girl, can he participate in sports? What's your view on that?
I think the Olympic Committee has done an extraordinarily good job on defining male and female, and they've done this since the dawn of time, or since the early 70s. And when Bruce was competing in the Olympics, I've heard stories of he would be in the weight room. Actually, my favorite story of him competing was the day before the decathlon in Montreal. He was in the weight room, and he's bench pressing the hell out of whatever huge heavy weight it was. And this lady comes in, and she's from the Soviet Union, and she's ripped. She's muscular. She's got pimples on her back. She's got back hair. She's looks like got a little facial hair. But technically, society would define her as a cis woman just because she was born with a vagina.
Cis woman who may be doping.
Doping, to say the least.
Yeah.
But, to answer your question, I think the Olympic Committee has done an extraordinarily good job on defining gender.
Which is, it's based on hormone levels.
Totally
if you've been taking the hormones. But
Yes.
this is where I go, we talked a little bit before we started about, does the movement go too far? Is there a risk that the movement goes too far and there's a backlash? Acceptance, love, non-discrimination, important goals for the community. But when it starts crossing over and suddenly people are feeling like, you've got boys who became girls and now they're winning the state championship in track, therein lies this potential backlash where people saying, whoa, what is this? Put the brakes on this. And, are we moving beyond simple acceptance to basically promoting this?
Well, we're not first of all, as someone that is on the forefront of fighting for the transgender movement and transgender rights for all transgender people, we are not promoting people to transition if they are not meant to transition. Nobody would go through a transition unless they really felt like it was the right thing to do, with very few
although I would say when going back to the 5-year-old, I do have this concern that it is being promoted that the 5-year-old should start this transition. So there is some push out there. It may not be coming from you, but I think there are extremists that might be.
There are extremists.
Yeah.
Certainly there are extremists that do this under the guise of political correctness, certainly, and it may not be the right choice for their child. But to go through a medical transition, to be committed to taking these hormones, that alters your physicality tremendously. And, I think I would again defer back to the Olympic Committee setting the standards based on hormones.
What about having sports for transgendered people? Why is it so important that the trans woman compete against other biological women and beat them in high school?
Well, Jim, I can tell you something. I cannot bench press worth a damn because I've been on hormones for 5-6 years. And from my own personal experience, I think that the again, defer back to the Olympic Committee in having hormone levels define what your gender is. I think that is an extremely acceptable solution.
Yeah, it's definitely a solution, and it's being adopted. I think tennis has adopted it. I think NCAA has adopted it.
Yeah.
But you could also understand how the average person goes, whoa, how did we get from biological sex being what defined what sport you played in to checking hormone levels? I mean, we used to check hormone levels it used to be to make sure that the person's not cheating. Now that's a fundamental determination as to which side you're going to play on.
Well, we can look at Olympians that don't, like cis men, that have lost testicles, and they have to take testosterone injections in order to meet the guidelines of competing as a male. And they don't have the right biological parts, but they are biologically male, but they don't have the correct testosterone level. So what do? We put them into the female category. They take the testosterone medication injections to allow them to compete.
What about this angle? That look, the world is not fair. Not everything is equal. We can't make everything be totally equal. There's some things that some people are fortunate at and some people are unfortunate at. I wasn't born with enough height to play in the NBA, so they're not going to adjust the NBA for me. So what about that suggestion that we can't constantly be tinkering everything to have ultimate equality and fairness?
That's a very good point. I heard that point made on Megyn Kelly's NBC show, and I subscribe to that also. Like, we're never going to make everything equal. But I think when it does come to breaking down sports, hormones is the number one way to do it. Let me tell you, there are super tall girls. There are super short men. There are super fast girls. There are super fast men. And I think if we have to look to something to deal with transgender athletes, I think hormones is by far the best answer. Having been on hormones for the appropriate amount of time, which I don't know that number off the top of my head, but I believe it's 18 months. Being on hormones for the appropriate amount of time is sufficient if you have to break it down that way.
Okay, back to politics.
Okay.
Are you a Republican?
It's been widely reported that I'm a Republican. I don't know really where that came from.
Well, hold on a second. I've got a quote that I dug up now. I think you may have only been 15 years old.
Oh, perfect.
Obama intentionally is taking down the country brick by brick.
Interesting. Where did you get that quote?
Blog Talk Radio.
Oh.
Do you recall there being an article about you when you were 15 and in debate and so on?
I don't know. In debate, we would debate international policy issues.
Does that not sound like something you would have said when you were 15?
Obama is tearing the country down brick by brick. I could have said that when I was 15. I'm sure we all say really crazy things when we're 15. But I, was kind of on a public platform when I was 15. And, these debates were nationally televised. I don't think I would have said that in a debate. It sounds like I said it in some interview. I would say I'm not 15 anymore. I see the world very differently, a lot less black and white than I did when I was 15. I would say, as someone that studied economics and understands the benefit of free markets, I am much more of a libertarian. I would not say I'm a Republican. And if I had to say, if I was a Republican or a Democrat, I would say I'm a California Republican. California Republicans are socially liberal. We want equality for all. We want welfare programs we want responsible welfare programs. We want compassionate immigration. We're not the Republicans of Texas. We're not the Republicans of the Midwest. So overall, I would say I'm a libertarian. The Republican Party does not represent me at all.
So, if you're a libertarian, the Democrat Party doesn't represent you either.
No.
Right? I mean, and by the way, I'm with you. I'm libertarian.
Yeah.
You know, liberal socially and conservative fiscally. I think we've proven that capitalism does wonders in the world.
As a business person, you kind of
Sure.
have to, it makes sense to be that way.
Right.
We want social responsibility.
So then, is it okay for a trans person to vote Republican?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, it's okay for a black person to vote Republican. It's okay for a Hispanic person to vote Republican.
You're not a one-issue voter, in other words.
No,
Right.
no, not at all.
Because, you know, Republicans you identify with in X, Y, and Z ways, and probably Democrats in other ways, and you have to make a balance. But when it comes to trans issues,
Yeah.
certainly most would say Republicans are not where they should be on trans issues.
Well, I would say a lot of Republicans are not where they should be on trans or LGBT issues. You know, Donald Trump is a big disappointment when it comes to trans and LGBT issues. I had a lot of hope that Trump would be different. Trump got so much Democratic support during the general election against Hillary Clinton. You heard Democrats saying, this is the first time I'm voting for a Republican, because he campaigned on being socially liberal. He campaigned on being pro-choice. He campaigned on being the most LGBT-friendly guy that Republicans would elect. He was the first Republican to ever support the LGBT community in his convention speech. But they were all lies. And Trump's a liar. And Trump will do what he needs to do to be reelected. And I do not support Donald Trump by any stretch of the imagination.
Okay, so it's 2 years from now, and let's say the economy is continuing to hum along.
Yep.
Let's say international relations are going well. Iran is, not building nukes. North Korea deal is in place. You know, new trade deals and so on. Everything is smooth sailing. Do you vote for Trump?
Hell fucking no.
Because of what he did on the LGBT
Yeah.
issue. So in that sense, you can be a one-issue voter when it comes to this.
Not just one issue voter. I think, I mean, this is not a political interview, so I don't want to get too deep into Trump's policies, but I am not a one issue voter. That is one issue that I do not support him on, but there are a laundry list of other issues I don't support him on.
So yeah, some of the big issues in the Republican platform is marriage equality.
Yep, wrong
supposedly
there.
Still on the platform is opposed to gay marriage. Speaking of marriage, what is your feeling though about the best environment to raise a child? It really leads into transgender parenting and so on, and transgender adoption and so on. Do you believe that the best environment for a child to be raised in is a loving father and a loving mother, or you think it can be just as good with two mothers, two fathers, trans father, etc.?
I think there are so many children in this world that need care, need love, need support. I think a gay couple, a lesbian couple, a cis couple, a trans couple, a cis and trans couple, as long as they are, able to love that child and give that child what they need to prosper, could actually be a really mind-opening experience for the child. And, in 30 years from now, I hope, that becomes more and more of the norm.
So throughout this, children has really been my focus, because
Yeah.
they're innocent and we need to raise our children properly.
And very impressionable.
They're our future and very impressionable. So it leads to my question, which is, when is the right time to discuss transgender with a child? Caitlyn has grandchildren.
I think the right time varies on a case-by-case basis. I think that every family deals with it differently. Caitlyn lived 65 years as Bruce. So that's totally different than if I have a child, or I can't have a child, but if I adopt a child, then how I would want them to address me. I'd want them to call me mom, But Caitlyn is fine with being called different things based on whatever the child and the grandchild is comfortable with. And I think whatever works for you and your family on a case-by-case basis. There's no rule book. There's no guidelines. I think we do what makes the trans person comfortable, but in turn, that's often what makes his children and grandchildren comfortable as well.
But as a result of trans becoming more out of the closet and so forth,
Yeah.
the issue's coming up younger and younger
Yeah.
for children. So how do you talk about it with a 6-year-old?
If the six,
If it's presented, whether it be because Caitlyn's grandchildren or the thing that I point out in the show is that we now have the gender neutral bathroom signs.
Oh, gotcha.
And there's the picture of a man, and there's a picture of a woman, and there's what's supposed to depict a transgendered person because it's wearing half of a skirt. And I don't know if you've seen these signs, but
I have seen those in Europe. They're very common. Yeah.
in San Francisco they banned them because they think it's insensitive.
To trans people?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's a little strange. I'm the person with half a skirt. I mean, what does that mean?
I don't know. I don't know if that's necessary. I think unisex restrooms are totally fine. Single stalls are totally fine. I was just in London last week, and it was one bathroom for everyone, just single stalls, and there's sinks in the middle. Totally fine. If someone wants to commit a crime in a bathroom, they're going to commit the crime. Chances are it's probably not going to be a transgender person to begin with.
Yeah. Well, it's another example of how transgender goes from 0.00 whatever percent of the population suddenly mainstream and everybody's dealing with it.
Yeah.
Because now you got bathrooms with these signs
Yeah.
that have this person on it that now suddenly mom's with 5 or 6-year-old and says, "Mommy, what does that mean?" And now the parent has to explain it.
Yeah, I think, I hope that trans people that have a platform, like myself, like Caitlyn, like Gigi, like Laverne, like Janet Mock, all the high-profile trans people, that children are being presented to at a young age or are being seen in pop culture at a young age. I hope they are just able to accept them as people, and the parent explains it in the way they best feel to explain to a child. If I can tell you a short little anecdote on that, Caitlyn was doing an interview about 6 months ago, and I was in the green room going through Twitter, looking at the response from the interview. And a mother wrote a tweet at Caitlyn, and the tweet said something like, "My 5-year-old son just asked me why that lady on television has a daddy voice," because Caitlyn, has a more masculine.
And I've heard people say before that for some reason children are better at noticing it than adults. But go ahead.
I think so.
Yeah.
Children are very perceptive. But she said her response was, "Oh shit, what do I say?" But her response was so good, and I'll never forget this. Her response was, "Well, some ladies have daddy voices." And I think that's case in point of every parent has to describe it the way they're comfortable describing it to their child. And of course, as a trans person that's visible and out there, I would hope they do it in a way that's, supportive and accepting of the trans experience.
Makes sense. Last question. We were talking about the transgender community, and it seemed like there was some ostracism of Caitlyn for some period of time. Could you just how do you describe the current relationship between you and Caitlyn and what you consider the transgender community?
The relationship with the trans community and Caitlyn has been rocky, but I don't think that relationship is representative of the entire trans community. I think a few voices of haters and naysayers and critics of Caitlyn have been elevated through social media. I don't think that is the common perception of Caitlyn. But the trans community has been Caitlyn's #1 critic. The general public is much more accepting of Caitlyn than the trans community. And that's because she comes from a place of privilege. She's been so misrepresented by the media. The media is horrible at misrepresenting people. They've been calling me a model for 2 years because I'm pretty. They said Caitlyn voted for Trump. Caitlyn never even voted for Trump. The media is brutal. And like we said again, they love to sensationalize everything, like those before and after pictures. They lift up a really critical, really negative voice against Caitlyn in the trans community. And that's the narrative. Suddenly, the trans community all hates Caitlyn, which couldn't be further from the truth.
Yeah. Well, the point of the movement, it seems to me, is allowing individuals to be themselves.
Yes.
Right? And this idea that everybody should be thinking the same way
Yes.
is totally counter to what this movement should be all about.
Absolutely. And that's why when you said, does a trans person have to vote Democrat, or can a trans person never vote Republican? That's why I said, absolutely not. A trans person can vote however they want to vote. You know, this is not a monolithic group of people. This is not a group of people that has all had the same experience. This is not a group of people like any demographic that has the same view on everything, or that's had an experience that's informed their view to be the same. Trans people are very diverse in their experience, beliefs, and opinions, and we should all be allowed to express those.
Well said. Sophia.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank
It
you
was
so much.
So nice to meet you.